everyone. It's your girl, Gabrielle. Welcome to a brand new episode of Hot Topics. So, if you are unfamiliar with my show, let me tell you what the show is about. So, this is the show where we like to have a real conversation about real topics, topics pertaining to education, employment, mental health, physical health. We've done topics on, there's food in my, sorry, there's food in my teeth. Anyway, we've done topics about homeschooling. What else? We've done topics about robots taking our jobs. We've done plenty of episodes about ADHD. So we've covered a lot of different ground within a certain ground in a way. I don't know if that makes sense. But today I am looking forward to this conversation because it is a continuation of the previous conversation. So it is a callback. So not only do I have a callback topic, I have a callback guest. So let me tell you what that topic is. So we are continuing the conversation about, where's my banner? There's my banner. Disability accommodations in college, part 2. So this is part 2 of our conversation. So the last conversation, part 1, there was a lot of ground we didn't cover. So hopefully we can cover a lot of that today. And my returning guest is Dan Jordan. There's his name there, Dan Jordan. And his mission is to make sure that anybody and everybody has equal opportunity access to college, regardless of their disabilities. So, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring him back to the stage. Hi, Dan. How you doing today?
Gabrielle, thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for coming back. So, there was a lot of ground that we didn't cover. So, hopefully, we can get to that as much as we can today.
Sure.
So, so last time we were talking about students going to college and their access to accommodations, special accommodations
Right.
in terms of classes, especially if they have disabilities, any diagnosed learning disability, cognitive disability, um, and I believe physical disabilities as well, right?
I don't have much experience with that, although that does happen. It's more physical illnesses like POTS is a popular one. Diabetes is another one that's rather common. MS, those types of things. Other types of physical disabilities, not so much. Really, not so much. Not really my forte. It's really kind of the hidden disabilities that are like learning disabilities, mental health issues, and ADHD. And it's pretty much the top ones that I could probably speak about.
Oh, that's fine. So that maybe you just gave me another topic for the show. All right, so let's get into the process more.
Okay.
So I think in the last show I asked if where you mentioned that there's not like a list of accommodations that students can get. So I guess let's go back.
All right.
so
Sure.
so a student, they go to college and they want to get those special accommodations. So let's start there. What is the process? We may have to repeat some stuff, but
Yeah.
what is the process?
The process is simple. They have to, choose a school. They have to look up the information for the accessibility office, which is called a bunch of different things. So you have to know what it's called at each school that you apply to. Could be the Office of Disability Services, accessibility offices, accessibility services. Could be a bunch of different things, and it could be housed in different areas too. So it's not just student services. Sometimes it's in the counseling services center, like mine was. It could be as part of the academic resources. So you kind of have to do some research there. And then pretty much the process is the student themselves has to initiate asking for accommodations from the right office. So when you find the right office, when you find the accessibility office, an email to them is probably the easiest thing. And you have to reach out to them. There's probably a process by which to do that. So if you find their webpage, it'll spell out what steps you really kind of need to take for that particular office. It could be something completely different at another school. So you really have to do your due diligence for the schools that students are really applying to and get accepted to. And typically, once you get accepted from a school, that's where the process really starts. So you do all your prep work beforehand. You find the office, you know about the documentation requirements, and you know how to apply. And then once you get accepted, that's probably where you're going to need to go ahead and send in your documentation. Probably fill out a form. And then you might have to meet with the accessibility staff so that they can ask you questions about what it's like for you to have your particular disability. And then you kind of agree on some accommodations, and then that's pretty much the process. There is a process by which to go ahead and notify instructors, but that's after you get done with the initial interview and send in your paperwork and the forms and all of that. So that's pretty much the process. You pick a school, you get accepted, you send in a form, and you request some specific accommodations for yourself, and then you send in some documentation and meet with somebody and talk about it, and that's pretty much the process.
So let's get into let's unpack that more. So
Sure.
all right, so is it a guarantee if you apply for those accommodations? Is it a guarantee that you'll get it? Is it like a wait and see type thing, or what's the guarantee of that?
Well, I think students really and parents really have to know that there's no guarantee at all. After high school, IEPs and 504 plans go away. They're no longer relevant. They're relevant in terms of documentation, in terms of history. When you get to college, that's definitely something that's relevant, but they don't transfer. So that's kind of an interesting caveat to the whole discussion. There's no guarantees of anything. So I can't speak. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not talking about law, so I can't really kind of speak to that. But it really depends on the individual. It depends on the impact of the disability that has on them. Is it significant? Is it not? And do the requested accommodations make sense? And there's certain times where they won't make sense, and that's where they won't be approved. And that might be very class specific, and it just may be something that's not reasonable because either it doesn't fit with the disability or the functional impact, or it's not reasonable because it's fundamentally altering something about a class or a particular requirement that the school has. Then those particular instances, those accommodations won't be approved or won't be used. If I can give you an example, it would probably help.
Please do.
So typical ones that get approved a lot are extended time and distraction reduction. Great for a test. Perfect for it. Great stuff. But let's say you're taking a public speaking class or you have to do a presentation. Public speaking classes, it's part of their requirement. You have to do a 2-minute speech, a 5-minute speech, a 10-minute speech, something like that. And so extended time doesn't really work with that. So the actual requirement is to do the presentation in 2, 5, and 10 minutes. And that's the requirement. So to give more time is probably not such a great idea. It's probably cruel and unusual punishment to give you more time, but it also doesn't fit with the requirement for that particular class, for that particular assignment. So it's probably a good example of what that is for something that won't be approved for a particular class, because it just will alter what that particular assignment and what that test is, because that is very class specific.
So, okay, so that makes sense. So, I guess in terms of, when they go to the, the office of, what is it? The office of, not the office of disabilities, disability services.
Mhm.
Um, So I guess like the student would have to say what classes they're taking, and then I guess the examiner determines what they get. Am I
Well, there's a
where am I?
yes, essentially yes, but it's not without having the student's input. It's not without having a conversation with that student about what's going on with them, about what they're requesting, what accommodations they're requesting, and why, without knowing why that fits for them, and without looking at those classes and saying, hey, you're a business major, you're probably going to have to take a public speaking class. So understand that extended time and distraction reduction is probably not going to work in that class. Understand why. So when you get to that class, just understand. And most students are like, yeah, I get it. I understand. I'm not going to have 7.5 minutes for a 5 minute presentation. It's just not going to go ahead and work there. So most students kind of understand that. And so it's not necessarily sort of something where you just send in some paperwork, you send in some stuff, and then magically something happens. That's not it at all. It's called the interactive process for a reason. And so you have to have some interaction thereof to make sure that it's very specific for that particular student. So it's kind of similar to like the IEP process, individual education plan. So it's very specific to that particular child. Well, that's a K through 12 thing. Very similar kind of emphasis on the individual in terms of what that is. So you might see one person with ADD and you've seen one person with ADD. So even though they may share some symptoms and some stuff, it's very different. Each student is going to need something different. So it may overlap. It may just be extended time and distraction reduction. It may be because those are very common, but it can be a lot of other things too. And that's going to be very specific to the person, very specific to their classes, very specific to their major sometimes as well.
All right. So let's break down the the process of, I don't know the word for it, but let's
Okay.
break down the process. Okay, so the student, they go to the office, they have the paperwork ready. Here's my
Yep.
IEP. Let's give an example. A common one is ADHD. So
Okay.
ADHD, here's the doctor's paperwork. Boom, everything is good. Okay, so what's the next step? Do you say like, what do you want, or is there is there a list, or so everything is good up to this point. What happens?
Well, the student will probably identify what they want and what they think they need on the form that they fill out in order to apply to have the accommodations. And so the interactive process, talking with the disability staff, is very specific to that particular student. So we're going to focus on what the issue is, how it impacts them, and have a discussion about what accommodations they're requesting and why, and how that fits with their description and their experience with their own disability. So if we're talking ADD, we're talking, okay, what's your experience with ADD? What does that look like for you? Where are you having issues with that? And so we're really going to break that down for them and with them having that conversation, um, so that we can get to how those accommodations fit with what's going on with them. So, a typical one for ADHD is I need more time because I lose focus and I have to reshift my focus while I'm taking a test. Pretty typical one. And so, when we hear that, we're going, oh, okay, now we kind of have an understanding of why there's a need for more time. And now it becomes a question of how much more time. And so there's a discussion about that too, how much more time that is. And so we're talking about what gets you off track during a test. And so it could just be you need just more time to really go ahead and refocus. It could be, you know what, there's somebody walking in the hallway that's really going to get me off track. And then I have to like reshift. And I'm like, what was that question about? I have no idea. I was halfway through. I kind of was really kind of focused, and then something happened and I have to reshift. Okay, well, that takes time for people. So that's something that we can reduce some of that. So that's where distraction reduction will come
Yeah.
in, and possibly more time. And so we can reduce the amount of distractions that we may have, but I can't, it's sort of limited in a way, because it's not going to eliminate anything that happens that's sort of a natural thing that happens. If it's raining, I can't do anything about the rain. There's noise from that. If somebody walks by the door and they cough, I can't do anything about that either. So it's reducing it as much as you possibly can. And students are able to go ahead and understand that there's a reasonable limit to what can be done with that. And so when we're talking about accommodations, we're having that discussion with them to figure out exactly sort of what works and what doesn't.
So I wonder if there's any like unusual requests that you
Yeah.
received. Is there any that
Yeah.
you could talk about?
Unusual requests happen all the time. And it's usually from listservs. I haven't gotten really kind of, in my experience, I haven't gotten anything that was really kind of way out of hand. But there have been some requests that kind of require a little bit more um, coordination with things. Okay. A typical example, if there was an archery class, part of whatever requirement, let's say there was an archery class, um, and there was somebody who was blind. Now, typically, you'd be like, "Wow, is that a safety issue?" And again, that's sort of a limitation. We can't have safety issues. Sort of, we can't approve an accommodation if it's a safety issue. But with that, yeah, there's lots of things you can do. There's lots of assistive technology. There's lots of different things to be done with that. Although it's an unusual request, we have to figure that out. And even though I may not have seen that, my position or the position of the accessibility staff is something where they have to go ahead and figure that out for that person. Is that something that we can do? Is there a safety issue? Probably, but we can mitigate that with X, Y, and Z. Okay, cool. Another unusual request. This has had nothing to do with me. This is something out in the Midwest. There was an example of a student who was blind and wanted to take a class in wagon train driving, which is a team of horses and wagons. It's a class. I swear to God, it's a class. And so whatever school that was, great class for that. I have no idea how that got worked out for that particular student, but our job as accessibility professionals, and although I'm not still doing that, I still say that I'm still sort of in that, because it's part of what I do. It's part of how I think. But what we do is we try and figure out, can we go ahead and do something for the student to make sure that the legal requirement for us to make sure that things are accessible to students with disabilities, that's our job. That's what we do. We kind of make sure, first and foremost, that everything the school has is accessible to students with disabilities, whether that's the physical environment or whether that's a wagon train driving course, or whether it's course materials, stuff like that. We have to figure that out. And that takes some time. So I'm sure people took time to figure out how to go ahead and have somebody who, is blind or has low vision. How do you engage in those particular activities? A little easier to do with students who have mental health issues or even ADD or learning disabilities. But it gets a little more complex too. It's not just straightforward. Because sometimes there's comorbidity. So we may talk to somebody who has ADD, but they also have anxiety or they have depression. The comorbidities with that, with mental health, overlap in 25 to 40%, sometimes more, depending on which statistic or which study you're really citing. So it gets a little more complex. So we have those unusual kind of things, and we're not experts in everything. So the first time I saw somebody with POTS, I had to do some Google searching to figure out what that really was. And what I really needed for that. So we're not really sort of, experts on everything. We just kind of need to make sure that we have the information from the right people that describe the right thing, and that the accommodations sort of match up. That's what we're really kind of doing. We're not trying to be experts in every disease and every kind of disability that's out there. We just need an overview, and we just need some information to make sure that what we're doing is having that student have the most access and reduce those barriers so they can have access. It's kind of what we do.
So, and that's very important, because it's, that's the message that you want to get out there, is that any student, regardless of their disabilities, can get an education, right?
Correct.
So, even if they have to get those accommodations, whether it's longer test time or little or scheduled breaks, or if they're able to use a computer or some sort of assisting technology, like you definitely want the message to get out there that anyone can get an education, uh, regardless of any kind of physical or cognitive barriers that they may have.
Correct. And there are some limitations with that. Like I said, with the example of the public speaking class, that's an accommodation sort of thing. But there are some limitations to that as well. So you mentioned assistive technology. So there are some limitations there. We cannot, or accessibility offices generally, don't approve things for personal use. So, or personal services. So if a student has dyslexia, let's say, it's typical that they will have something for speech to text and text to speech, because it's easier for them to go ahead and say what they want to write, and it makes it that much more accessible. For a test, we can do that in the testing center, not a problem. Are we going ahead and giving that to a student and having access for that, for text to speech and speech to text, for their personal use, for their own homework, for writing papers and that kind of stuff? Typically, no. That's on the student to do for themselves. There's a lot of stuff out there. Google has some great stuff that's out there. Microsoft also has some great stuff out there that's pretty free and pretty accessible. But those personal things, personal items for personal use, are not typically technology that accessibility offices would just say go ahead and do. That's on the student to go ahead and use on their own, and to have access to for themselves. So that might be a barrier for somebody who, let's say, used that K through 12 and didn't have access to that for themselves. It may be something that they really have to think about and know about ahead of time so they can get that for themselves, because typically colleges are not going to go ahead and approve that.
So, along the lines of limitations, think so. If someone wanted like a smaller class size or something, so could that be accommodated?
No, classes are what they are. Now, if you need to sit up front, let's say, for whatever reason, typically, let's take the ADD student. Well, if they have ADD, it might be more distracting to sit in the back. Okay, that makes sense. Let's reduce the distractions you would have in a classroom full of, like, let's say 30 to 50 people. Typical class size, 25 to 30, typical class size. We can sit you up front. That's not a problem. Honestly, that's really not a problem. Now, sometimes we can move a class, which I've had to do for some students, because the building, especially if you go on the East Coast schools, the older the school is, the more physically inaccessible that kind of environment just may be. So that's where the college tour comes in. Is it going to be physically acceptable and accessible to somebody who has those physical challenges? Sometimes not so much, for particular classrooms. So yeah, I've had to move some classrooms for people, but that's just finding a different building to put that in. I'm not saying, well, my disability only allows me to have, and I couldn't even tell you what disability that would be. But let's say somebody hypothetically came in with a request saying, hey, I only need 10 students per class. I'm like, sorry, that's not going to happen. It's absolutely not going to happen. It just can't be. Classes are what they are. We can sort of look for some kind of things like put you up front. That might be an alternative, but that's a really strange request. I don't know if anybody would ever request that, but I don't think it would ever be approved, ever. Class sizes are what they are.
What about like a para or someone a para? I'm just thinking like what are things that people
Right.
typically ask for like IEP? Right. So something like a para, a scribe.
Right. Depends on what it is. So if you're talking like somebody with a physical disability who needs a professional to be with them because of their physical needs, then no, we wouldn't approve that. If they want a personal tutor, probably not. That's sort of an alteration for what that particular service is. Every student has access to tutors. Now, it may not be exactly what the student is used to. So tutoring may be in a group setting or maybe like a couple of people sitting around a table. It's not going to be one-on-one. Most of the time, it's not one-on-one. There are some schools that you kind of have to do your due diligence when you do your college tour and look at those to look at the services and say, I'm going to need tutoring in X, Y, and Z. Do you have that? And what is the nature of the tutoring? Can I go and have an individual tutor or is it group setting? So you kind of have an expectation of what that is instead of showing up and thinking that you're going to get a personal tutor and you want a personal tutor because that's what you're used to. And now you don't have that. So that's a complete mind shift. And that's where a lot of frustration for some students and some parents can come in is you just didn't expect that. But you have to do your due diligence with that. The scribe, well, if we can do, if we can do speech to text, sure. But the student may not be used to that. I may not be used to that. There may be some things where we can do that. It's not unusual. Or let's say it's very specific to a student and they need a reader, but it's very technical in terms of the terminology. So pronunciation for that in terms of auditory kind of issues and needing a reader for a test and understanding it and comprehending things, well, you have to pronounce the words right. So sometimes it's very technical and sometimes the instructor, depending on the complexity of all of that, will need to go ahead and read that test to them to make sure that the words are pronounced correctly. So that can be something that's a little more personal. Sometimes that may not happen because it's not technical. But those types of services that you're talking about most likely are at an academic resource center, and most colleges do have them. And the student has to do their due diligence in looking at what they may need and how those services are really structured and what they have access to. Some schools just provide tutoring and their student tutors. Some schools also have that in addition to like a math specialist or writing specialist, an English specialist, those types of things. Some schools don't. You're going to have to look at what that is. And if you need specific help that's beyond what the school can provide, you already have access to that. Every school has access. It's not an access issue. It may be what the student's used to, or they may need something extra that the school just doesn't naturally provide. Well, the school's not obligated to provide that. So if you need a math specialist and your school doesn't have one, you're going to need to hire one.
And that's that's the tough reality, of seeking accommodations, is you may need something unique or something very niche or something very specific that a college may not provide, and you may have to supply your own.
That's correct. And just working off that point, this is the reason why I always emphasize get your accommodations early. Go through that process as soon as you get accepted to a school. Don't wait on it. Just go ahead and go through that process. Choosing a school, fine. You can choose a school wherever you want. And sometimes students would shop around for accommodations, accommodation shopping. Okay, cool. Well, you need to go ahead and to look at your options for what schools can provide and not provide by doing that really early. And then you can see a full picture of what happens with financial aid, what happens with services, what happens with the accommodations. And so now you have all three tiers and all three buckets are full. And now you can look at a full picture of services and what you have and then make a choice based on what's good. But you're not going to do that if you wait until August to go ahead and, hey, let me choose my school first. And let me wait till August to go ahead and do that because I spent so much time waiting and trying to mull it around in terms of which school was appropriate. Do it early. They're under no obligation to go ahead and go to that school just because they gave you accommodations, just because you went through that process. And another caveat is even if you go to the school, you don't have to use them if you don't want to. You might be great at English and you don't need anything in English. All right, cool. Well, you don't have to use it for that class. But as long as you have them, well, that's one less thing that you got to worry about. And one more thing to consider that might be the difference between what school you choose to go to and not. So it's probably one of the more important aspects of things. And just do it sooner, because then if you wait until August, you're going to be waiting. And then you start school and you're like, oh, I got to do this. And it happens all the time. They choose a school and then they wait until school starts to contact the accessibility office to say, hey, I need stuff. A lot of students do that. And the other students that were there already are already kind of coming through the door asking for what they need too from followings for the prior semester. So it's crunch time, and then you're waiting, and then there's stress. And then if you choose not to do anything until like October, which does happen too, now there's even more stress on top of that. Just get them early. Just get them early. Just go through that process early. It's just a bunch of stress you don't need.
I'm a little confused by that. So because don't you have to be accepted by the school first before you get the accommodation? So
correct.
Like when you say do it sooner, what do you mean? Wouldn't it make sense to find the school first and make sure you get accepted first and then do all that other stuff?
Well, most students are applying to multiple schools and they're getting multiple acceptances for that. And I'm always saying, look, if you're going to go ahead and consider a school, and let's say you've applied to five have come back. They've all said, hey, you can come to you've got accepted to all five, but you're really thinking about three. Okay, then apply to all three of them. Because if you're doing that early on, and you can always make your choice based on what it is that the services and all the other things, and then it's based on financial aid, however you felt at that school. It's about all that package. You have more information going in. So typically schools will not allow you to apply for accommodations until you've been accepted, but most students apply to different schools all at the same time. And so they can get accepted by multiple schools. And so my advice is when you get accepted from a school, go through that process with every school that you've been accepted to and do it soon.
Oh, so you're meaning like some people, they get the acceptance, they move into campus or whatever, then they do the classes and then They realize, wait, I want the accommodation.
Right.
Oh, okay. And you're saying as soon as they get the acceptance, go for it.
Right. Yeah. Just do it. If you get the acceptance letter, look up the information that you've already had, grab your folder of information from that school and go ahead and apply for those accommodations from that school. And then you can make the decision. You can really kind of go in with full information about that particular school, and then you can weigh the other schools in terms of the same information or the same things. It's happened to me numerous times that a student came to my school and talked to me. And the reason why they came was they're like, yeah, the accommodations you gave to me made sense. And the other school made a different determination. And I'm hard pressed to find, why did you make a different determination? But that happens. It's rare that it happens, but it happens. And it's, I could probably think about a dozen students that's happened to. And they're like, yeah, I came to your school because the other school I applied to, they didn't give me anything that I needed. and you gave me things that were kind of important for me, that meant for access. So each school is a little bit different, and you can be surprised that way. I was always shocked when that happened. um, but it can happen. So, and what you request on that page may not necessarily be what that person determines is appropriate for you. Okay. You have to be prepared for that. And so that's the reason why, if you're going through that, that's why I say do it early. As soon as you get that acceptance letter, just apply, because you're not really sure exactly what one school is going to determine over another. And for our thing, it's not just what you have listed on there, it's just what means for access. So whatever you kind of need for access, accessibility staff are going to look at all of that information from talking to you, and there may be things that you didn't even know existed. Like that happen all the time, especially with students with learning disabilities. I would say you kind of need books in a different format here. Like, if you're not reading them because you just kind of can't comprehend that and you get off track an awful lot and it's frustrating, okay, well, maybe you need books in alternate format, but that wasn't on their IEP. So sometimes we can do more, which is great news. But it may be things that you kind of need some instruction on, like, how do I get that? And then I need a reader for those books, and what do I need to use for that? And the accessibility staff are there for all of that. So I'm not trying to scare people. I'm trying to say, do it early, figure it out. Don't ask for, ice cream at every test, because it's not going to be approved. So make sure it fits with what your experience with your disability is. Ask for things that you kind of think are reasonable, that also fit with the documentation that you have. Have that discussion with people, but do your due diligence. Do your due diligence for yourself and with your parents by looking at those schools from day one, going on that tour and looking at what services are there. And then when you get accepted, yep, I've already looked at the Disability Services Office. I've already looked at the documentation requirements. I know the process. I can go through this real quick. And then you're looking at what that school's offering to you in terms of accessibility. And that's really that's individually specific, and it's also school specific. So there's not like one giant office for the entire country. Each school has their own office for that. And that's why I say go through that soon, go through that early, because some offices may offer, some basic stuff, and some may offer a little bit more based on who the interviewer is, based on their experience, based on how you like them, that kind of stuff. You may give more information to one person because they just ask better questions. Always go through that process and go through it early, and don't be surprised if one school just doesn't really kind of match up. It's okay. It's just that's how that school kind of operates, and that's just how they do things. That's all.
Yeah. So just so I understand, so when it comes to accommodations, it's something that the school provides to the student, or does the student have to bring their own materials? So I mean, like the extra test time and like breaks, like, okay, that's something
Okay.
the university accommodates, but
Right.
let's say a student needs some kind of uh, assisted learning device. Um, is that something the university will provide, or is the student responsible for bringing it?
Depends on what it is. Sorry, I got nothing specific for that. If it's a personal device, the school's not obligated to go ahead and offer it. If it's if it's a personal assistant or a personal tutor and you want something specific for that, probably not. That's probably not going to happen. If
Well,
you
I mean,
need
not to interject. So maybe something like I think there's this program called Otter that changes like speech to text.
okay.
So something like that, and it's on the person, and I think it's an online software that someone can download to a laptop. So if is that something that the university would give to the student, or can the student bring their own, and do they have to get permission from the university?
Typically, the student, if they're already using something like that or using another kind of software that they're very familiar with, if they're using that for their own personal homework and doing their own personal study, go ahead. The university doesn't have to approve that. The student has the freedom to go ahead and use whatever assistive technology works for them. And the accessibility office has nothing to say about that. That's something for their own personal use. They have the freedom to use whatever they want. Now, it may be very different when they get to the accessibility office or the testing center, and the testing center uses a different program for speech to text or text to
Mhm.
speech. Student may not necessarily be familiar with that program, so there's some education that needs to be provided with that. But that's more about equivalency rather than the specific program. So a student can't go ahead and say, hey, I use X program for speech to text and text to speech, when I'm studying. You have to provide that for my tests. If my testing center already provides that, gold, okay. But as long as it's equivalent and does an equivalent thing, the school doesn't have to go ahead and provide the exact same thing for you. So it just has to be equivalent and does do the same thing. And that may require a little bit of more education getting familiar with that. And that's just working with the testing center, let's say, and the testing center staff to go through all of that to make sure you're comfortable way before you go ahead and take your first test.
Okay. So something like if a student needs the questions read out loud to them,
Right.
the professor would do that?
In certain circumstances, yeah. If, like I said, there's the professor can go ahead and do that. They can go ahead and schedule that and do all of that if they want to. The testing center is there for the convenience of the student and for the convenience of faculty. So a professor could go ahead and read the test to the student. It happens sometimes. Like I said, with classes that are a little more technically involved and they have technical language. That could be a biology class or a nursing class or something like that. So again, the pronunciation is really kind of a key element there. So if you're looking at that, then the student has to or can go ahead and say, I think my professor needs to read this to me because these are really technical terms and I don't want, the speech to text to do that. And that's something the student can ask for. The school will probably go ahead and identify that. And with the accessibility office will automatically go ahead and say that and say, okay, we need to have this read to the student. And it's rare that that will happen. But this professor can go ahead and do that for a student in those particular technical classes.
All right. All right. Well, this was very informative, and we covered a lot. So thank you for all of this information. And is there any final words of wisdom you'd like to share?
Get your accommodations early. If you get accepted, do it early and know the process. Really go ahead. And we've talked about what happens prior to the process of getting the accommodations. Well, what happens afterwards? Ask about that too. How is your information kept confidential and private? How does that happen? Who has access to your information? What do I need to tell my professors? How do I do that? And so the accessibility office staff will be able to give you that information. It's really good information. Know it, live it, and it may be something that makes a difference between which school you choose to go to and which school you don't go to. So just make sure you do that early and ask those questions. It's part of the process for getting the accommodations. You kind of get them and then figure out, how are my instructors notified? What do I need to do for my tests? All those follow-up questions happen after you have accommodations that are approved, and the accessibility staff are there to help you. So don't wait to get all that information. Get it right up front before, so you can hit the school. You can hit that first semester right off the bat with having less stress, and then you can figure out whether or not you want to use them or not, which I don't recommend for the first semester. I recommend just use your accommodations across the board in every class so you know the process and you know exactly what to do and what not to do in certain situations. You know the lay of the land, you know how the accessibility office works, you know how the testing center works, you know what to do, how to schedule it, you know what people to talk to. You kind of get all of that for the first semester. It's less stress for you, and less stress means you do better, pretty much. And if you have the accommodations that you need, guess what? You set yourself on a nice, even playing field for everybody else. And now you just get to show what you need to show. And that's pretty much it. And you learn how to be a college student. And that's just what everybody's trying to do their first semester is learn how to be a college student. But you don't have to go into it with more stress. Lessen your stress. Just get your accommodations early and ask all those questions. Just do it.
There you go. Right there. Boom. Just do it. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. And so let me get your contact information up on the screen for the video people. All right. So Dan Jordan, you can find him online. His website is accessingcollege.com. You can also find him on his Facebook page, which is just Accessing College. That is the handle. You can also find him on Instagram. It is Accessing College, but there is an underscore. So Assessing underscore college. So there's a subtle difference there between the Facebook and the Instagram. So make sure you pay attention to that. And all of that information is scrolling below at the bottom of the screen for my video people. For my audio people, I did not forget about you. So if you are listening to this right now on, whether it's Spreaker or Spotify or Apple Podcasts, all of this information is in the description. So I did not forget about you, but I will just say that information one more time. So his website is accessingcollege.com. Facebook page, it is just Accessing College. That's the handle. Instagram is accessing underscore college. So I encourage you to follow him on Facebook and Instagram and check out his website for more information about his services. So Dan, can you tell us more about, let's talk about more about your services. What do you do?
Sure. Well, I basically, make sure that parents can transition out of being a main advocate from K through 12, and students can go ahead and advocate for themselves. They become the main advocate. That takes a little bit of support. It takes a little bit of knowledge. It takes a little bit of getting used to. And so all my services are there to either help a student become their own self-advocate and take over that responsibility, or go ahead and navigate school in the best way possible. Like time management is always a huge problem. So there's some time management stuff that's there. Test anxiety is also an issue for that as well. And so it's all based on either accessibility and speaking up for yourself and being that advocate for yourself and learning how to do that. Like I said in the prior interview, students with learning disabilities just don't typically get that type of education. They just don't have that repetition. And so I wrote a book. It's on Amazon. That's there too. The course is also there. So depending on how people really respond to things. Some people are readers, and that's great. And some people just respond more to something that's a little more auditory. That's there too. All my courses are broken down into simple, easy to capture types of information. So nothing is more than 15 minutes a pop. So even if the lessons are like 4 or 5 lessons or whatever, each lesson is only about 15 minutes, maybe tops. I try and keep it in between 10 and 15 minutes, just so nobody's overloaded with stuff. Some of the issues can be a little more complicated, like legal kind of issues. So that's part of the information for some of the programs. But I try and keep it as simple as possible so people can process that information. And they can always go ahead and ask me questions if there's something in the program that they need to go ahead and have more information on, or they're confused by. They can always go ahead and get to me. But it's geared towards the advocacy, and then lessening your stress by setting yourself up with great kind of routines and structure, and then lessening all that stress by making sure you have what you need way ahead of time. So that's the student success portion. And with students that have learning disabilities or even mental health, or even students that just don't necessarily have a disability. They may kind of not be a great test taker. That may be kind of, part of that whole test anxiety kind of portion. So those courses are all up for that. And for those that are mental health therapists, I have a course that's coming for that too. So they can help their students. And that's another problem. Students with learning disabilities, they know they kind of have an issue. They just don't know how to talk about it. Students with mental health can talk about it. They just don't know that they have the opportunity to get the accommodations. It's like the script is flipped. And so, if I get the information out for that for mental health therapists can have that background to go ahead and say, hey, you're a college student. This is something you can get accommodations for. Let's talk about that. I think it's just a great thing to have, and to just remind students that if you do have a mental health issue, you can get accommodations too. They're out there. You kind of have to go ahead and pursue that and learn how to pursue that. But that information is out there. And so that's the reason why I have those courses.
Awesome, awesome. And you mentioned your book. Let me make sure to put up that banner there. You have a book called Self Advocacy for Higher Education: a step-by-step guide to preparing to request accommodations in college. It is now on Amazon. Uh,
Sure.
so you started talking about it, but well, why did you feel the need to write a book?
Um, because I saw when I first got to college and I first got that employment, my son had just been diagnosed with dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. And so I was on the forefront of doing the IDA while I'm also trying to do accessibility in college. And there was a gap that I saw in college. There was a gap that I saw just automatically, just with what information was being told to my son, which was almost nothing. So it was up to us as parents to give him that information. But what I saw in college was students with learning disabilities. They didn't know the name of it. They've never read their eval. They didn't know where it was. They didn't know who to ask for it. They didn't know how it related to the services that they got in school. They just knew they kind of showed up once a year for some meeting with a whole bunch of people, and they couldn't even tell me what that was about. And so there was an information gap that was happening. And so when I was telling my son, I'm like, hey, this is the reason why you have these services. You have dyslexia, you have these kinds of things. It's the reason why it doesn't mean that you're not smart. It just means that you just need to learn in a different way. And so students with learning disabilities that would come to me that were 18, 19 years old had never had that conversation with somebody. And so the book was written to fill those gaps, to really kind of go ahead and give students and parents who are the main advocate, K through 12, is to really go ahead and transition all of that information over to your student who typically just doesn't get it. And they don't get that type of instruction. They get prompts. You need to speak up for yourself. You need to be your own advocate, but nobody tells you how. Well, this book fills that gap. It gives you the information, and self-advocacy starts with self-awareness. And this is all about self-awareness. I'm a therapist by trade and vocation and training. It's what I've done for the past 20, 25 years. So um, having self-awareness is really important if you're going to move forward with whatever issue you have. So it fills that gap, and it walks them through knowing what to do for college. So when we say, hey, you're going to meet with a college accessibility staff and you're going to have to describe what that is, this gives you all the information by which to do so. It walks you through that entire process from start to finish. What's the name of your disability? Where do you find the information? What information from those assessments do you really kind of need to read? And how does that relate to what's going on with you? And then it walks you through a whole bunch of questions to go ahead and really know about that, because what's missing from the information is the day-to-day kind of examples that are really rich with important examples of how that learning disability really impacts a student on a regular basis. They're really rich and they just get missed. My book just walks you through all of that, and it comes to the forefront. So when you get to that meeting with accessibility staff, it just rolls right off your top of your tongue. Like you have the awareness, you have the information, it's all there. It just pulls it out and fills the gaps that K through 12 just didn't really sort of do. So it really kind of does all of that. And so at the end of it, what you have is a very self-aware individual with a learning disability that can speak really confidently about their particular issue. Now, whether they choose to speak up about it or not, that's entirely a separate discussion, entirely a separate thing. I want students to have full information about themselves so they have the awareness and they have the self efficacy and they have that empowerment of information that's just missing. And so the book gives them the information. The book walks them through that. Um, and then they have full information. They can decide for themselves what they want to do. But now it's a fully informed decision. And if they are going to advocate for themselves, now they have the information. It's just great stuff. So it's the reason why I wrote the book, is to fill those gaps and give that information to students that typically just were not having it.
There we go. All right. So thank you for your book. Thank you for the wealth of information that you have. And
Sure.
thank you for coming back to Hot Topics
Yeah.
and, diving into this with me again. So thank you for coming back on the show. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, and thanks for inviting me back for a second time. I tried to keep my answers a little shorter than the first time, so hopefully we got to everything. And if there's ever something that you need or your guests kind of need, or I'm more than happy to come back.
Awesome. I'll keep that in mind. Thank you so much. All right, let me place you backstage now. All right, you guys, that is it for the show. So, all right, you guys. So we have reached the conclusion of yet another episode. And I think this is the last show of 2022. So, yeah. So happy early new year, I guess, depending on when you're watching or listening to this. But anyway, this is the final show of 2022. So I'm marking it in now. I'm putting it in that little time capsule. So whenever you come back to this episode, you're like, whoa, remember 2022? Yeah. So final show of 2022, you guys. All right. So just throwing that out there. Anyway, so I just want to remind you guys that this podcast is a production of my company, A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. So, as we were talking about colleges, I just want to remind you guys that it's not just K to 12 that we serve. We also do college students as well. So, I'm putting this message out there for college students. If you are in college and you are looking for a tutor, you need a personal tutor, you need some homework help, you need that one-on-one attention, we are here for you. I encourage you to reach out to us, seek our services. You could check us out online. Our website is www.astepaheadtutoringservices.com. You could also email us at success@astepaheadtutoringservices.com. You could also find us and follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Eventbrite, WhatsApp, Instagram, and YouTube. So I encourage you to, check us out on our various social media platforms. And while you're there, give us a follow, give us a like, follow us, stay in touch with us. We'll, stay in touch with all of our announcements. So just stay in touch with us overall, right? So as you're reaching out to us, as you're learning about us, I encourage you to seek us out on social media to learn about us as well. And again, I will share our website, www.astepaheadtutoringservices.com. So I encourage you to do that as well. So, so if you're, like I said, you're a college student, because we serve children and adults, so you're in college, no matter what age you are, you need that assistance, the academic assistance, reach out to us. We are here for you. And I also encourage you to sign up for our Hot Topics text blast. Just text the code Hot Topics to 917-764-3975, and you will be on that text blast. Again, just text the code Hot Topics to 917-764-3975. You will get up-to-date announcements about our shows with the audio and video. So I encourage you to get on that text blast. I think I'll stop it there. I know it's a mouthful. Everything is at the bottom of the screen right now. if you are watching this on video, and if you're listening to this on audio, don't worry, I did not forget about you. All of this information is in the description. So I encourage you to seek our services, A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. That's what we're all about. We're all about sharing information. We're all about sharing knowledge. So, we're putting all that out there. Let us know what you thought about this episode. You know, drop a comment in the comment section below. Let us know your thoughts about this episode. Give us a rating as well, for the audio people on Spotify, Apple, all that good stuff. Drop a rating as well. Drop a comment, drop a rating, drop something, drop your feedback. Let us know what you thought about this episode for today. All right, you guys, that is it. Thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a great ride. So, thank you for joining me in 2022. And the next time that you will see me will be in 2023. So, have a happy new year, and I will see you guys in 2023. All right, bye, you guys. 2023, here we come. Bye.